Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, the channel where we are making a computer role-playing game using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. I've been talking about what I call quirks in the last few videos, which are ways in which the different species of monster in the underworld behave slightly differently. And I've been talking about ways to let the player learn the quirks of the monsters so that that can help them make sort of good decisions in interacting with them. I think in the last video I showed you a spell which allows that to happen, and I said that I was going to show you a couple of other ways once I added them in, and that's what I want to do this video. I want to show you another way. As usual, I'll show you what it looks like in play, and then I'll show you the code. The code is quite simple. There's no really new techniques. I want to keep going till I get I wanted to get a character with slightly high intelligence because it'll make it a bit easier. I should say before we start that I am playing a version of the game where I've slightly altered the probabilities. I've made it much more likely that the thing that I want to show you will happen, just for obvious reasons. I don't want to sort of be wandering around not finding the thing that I want. So, with that in mind, let's have a look. And there we go, found it first time. So it says the walls are covered in writing, and we have the option to try to decipher it, or we can ignore it. If we ignore it, we just go back to the exploration screen, and we have this symbol for writing. Possibly not the most informative symbol, but there it is. And one peculiarity is, let's leave to the west. Now we know that this writing exists to the east, but if we move quickly, we won't see it. Whereas if we move slowly, or cautiously rather, we will get it. Now that's a deliberate decision. I wanted to make that an advantage of moving cautiously. The justification in the fiction of the game is that you remember you're meant to be moving through a sort of dark underground environment lit only by your lantern, and I thought in that context it would be quite easy to miss something written on the wall. So if you move quickly, you don't catch these what I call them clues in the code of the game. You only get them when you're moving slowly. So let's try to decipher it. And we roll a virtual d20 and we add our intelligence, and we rolled a 1, so not surprisingly we haven't been able to do it. Every time we do this, it costs us 5, 10 or 15 minutes. And we can just keep trying indefinitely. There's no other penalty. Okay, so this time we did quite well, and it says the writing seems to be instructions on how to cast Fairy's Fortune, and this is one of two things that the writing can be so far, although I do have plans to add more. It can be information about the quirks of different species in the dungeon, or it can be instructions on how to cast a spell. If it's instructions on how to cast a spell, if you choose to keep reading, you lose 1 to 6 willpower. So we were lucky we only lost 1 willpower, and you get the spell, in this case, Fairy's Fortune. So let's keep going and try and get... There we go, there's more writing. Okay, so this is the thing that I wanted to show you today. The writing speaks of a race which lives in the underworld. They have the appearance of disembodied floating heads of wolves with empty holes where their eyes should be, from which smoke rises. They take great offence at arrogance. A haughty approach will never result in them allowing you to enter their settlement. So if we were playing this properly, we should write that down, and then if we ever meet this species with the disembodied floating heads of wolves with empty holes where their eyes should be, then we know that it would be a bad idea to take a haughty approach. which otherwise would be a reasonably good approach because we have a high, well, actually, no, we probably wouldn't be taking, sorry, I was looking at the wrong attribute there. We probably wouldn't be taking a haughty approach anyway because it relies on willpower. But in other circumstances, that would be quite useful to know. So, and then we just continue on our journey. So, all right, I'll cast the terrible word and see if yep, there we go. All right, so that's what it looks like in play, with the caveat that I made these, I call them clues. I made them much more likely than they will be in the normal game. Let's look at spend the rest of the video looking at the code. So you may remember that we have this array LT, and it's got 10 slots in it, not counting 0. And the when you go to a new area, the program generates a random number from 1 to 10 and looks at the relevant slot to see what's in there. Now, I had it like that because 3 is the one we want, the clues, but it should be like this, with 4 of the options being 0, which is there's nothing special, it's just tunnels. 5 being the possibility of a dead traveller, which is another special little encounter that I don't think I've looked at in detail yet on a video. 3 being a clue, which is the thing that we're talking about today. 1 being settlements, and 2 being special encounters, which is the temple of Glycon and the pool that you can float in. All right, so it generates or it picks a number from this set of 10, and then it puts it in MS, which is an array that shows the sort of basic type of encounter that's at a given area. So MS is a 2-dimensional array. So, for example, MS 3-4 will tell you what's at the junction, which is 3 west of the start and 4 north of the start. MS -1 -2 would be what's at the junction MS24 would be 2 east and 4 north. MS -1 -2 would be 1 west and 2 south of the of 0 0, which is the starting junction. And if MS, the slot in MS that relates to the player's current location, is indeed a clue, then it goes to clue. Now, this bit we've seen before, so I don't want to talk about it in too much detail. That's just a subroutine that lets you turn the sound on or off. The bit that we're interested in this is this. It's just the text. The walls are covered in writing, and you have the choice of trying to decipher it or ignoring it for now. If you ignore it for now, you go to Explore, which is the array that prints the picture of the junction and then any symbol. In this case, it'll be the symbol for a clue, of course. But let's say that you do want to decipher it. Well, we go to clue 2. Now, first of all, we reduce LO by a random number from 1 to 3 inclusive. LO is the lamp oil. So that equates to 5, 10 or 15 minutes. And this I've discussed before. All this is saying is check that, because we do this every time the lamp oil goes down, check that the player has a source of light, which will either be lamp oil or the cat's eyes, the magic item, and assuming that they're not that they do, and assuming that they're not dead, send them on to clue 3. Well, clue 3, again, we've seen this before. We it sets the variable z to int, or capital I, capital N, capital T, which is the abbreviation for intelligence, of course. And then it goes to roll and add. And all that roll and add is, we've dealt with this in a previous video. I'm going to be saying that a lot. It will find the attribute that equates to the value of z. So it'll find the one that's your intelligence, and it'll generate a random number from 1 to 20, and it'll add the value of your intelligence. And then what happens then depends on the value of RR. That's the roll result that it returns. If RR is over 20, then particular things happen. But let's look at the simpler thing first, which is else. If RR is not over 20, in other words, if it's 20 or less, well, it just says you're unable to decipher the writing. You can keep trying, which sends you back to clue 2. So you'll lose more lamp oil and you'll get to roll again. Or you can ignore it for now, which sets you to explore. So it's as if you had decided not to bother continuing to read it, except that you've lost that lamp oil. But let's say that you are successful. Well, then there's another random choice, because as I said, there are two different things that can happen, or two different things that the clue can turn out to be. One, it can turn out to be instructions on how to cast a particular spell, but if it's not that, then it'll be information about a quirk. So I'll deal with information about a quirk first, because that's quite simple. We set z to a random value between 1 and bf.length minus 1. Now you'll remember, or some of you will remember, that bf is the basic forms, that's what bf means, of descriptions of monsters. So there's six basic forms, such things as the offspring of humans and bracket A, bracket A end bracket, and bracket A end bracket is then turned into something from a list of animals. So you might say they look like the offspring of humans and horses, something like that. And then it'll add a little extra thing, like they've got horns, or they've got no eyes, or they have one eye, or they have a tail, or etc., etc. But why is it using BF? Well, because I have decided that there will be as many species in the dungeon as there are entries in this array, and each of the species will use one of these different structures. And the reason for that is that ensures that no two species in a given game will have the same description. Because even if you pick, so for example, H with the heads of A, meaning something human with the heads of something animal, so it might be old women with the heads of bears or something like that. Well, we could get the same results here, but it'll be a different description, because it'll say old women from the waist up, bears from the waist down. So that's obviously a different thing. So by having one species with each of these sort of structures for their description, we ensure that we don't accidentally get two species with the same description. So that's why we're using BF. That's why we're using BF here, and in doing this, we are essentially picking a random species. And then we include this new page called Quirk Clue. There it is. Okay. So this looks a bit confusing, but it's fairly easy once I explain it. It gives you some text. This is all a big print command. Then it'll set MSCXCY to 0. What that means is that the encounter type in this junction is now set to 0, which is there's nothing of interest here. And the reason is, well, you've already read the information. There's no point presenting it to you again every time the player comes back. That would be quite tedious. So we'll just take it as read and set this to 0 so you can just move through the area quickly. And then we have a link which says continue and takes you to explore, which is the sort of hub where it prints the map. And this again is just the option to turn the sound on and off. So let's look at this text. This is the complicated bit of this page. So it says, the writing speaks of a race which lives in the underworld. They, and then we've got what looks like a random choice from the array D2. We've got that familiar structure where it's the name of an array, square bracket, random 1, comma, the name of the array, dot length -1, end bracket, end square bracket. That really is just saying print a random entry from D2, then print CDZ, then print QD/QZ. Well, I'll go through those three things one at a time. A randomly chosen entry from array D2 is just a sort of little grammatical link. So it's they look like, resemble, have the appearance of, have the form of, or appear to be. So that's when you are told about monsters or see some monsters, it'll say they look like old women with the heads of bears. But I felt that if it always said look like, that it, if the wording is always the same, it becomes easier for the player to spot the structure. And eventually the player's going to spot the structure anyway. But the more you sort of slightly mix it up, the more it sounds like natural language, and the more the longer it will take, at least, for the player to twig to the way that the language is structured, and it'll seem more natural. So that's why I've got a whole array, which is just different ways of saying look like. Let's go back to quirk clue. So that's all that means. And then it's CDZ. Well, we know from the previous page that Z is a randomly chosen species. So that is going to be CD, the slot in array CD for the species that we've randomly picked. And CD is simply the description, the text description of the species. And then we have QD/QZ. Well, that's one of those things. This is one of these things where we've got sort of embedded values. So we've got Q square bracket, $Q square bracket, $Z, end square bracket. $Q is the number of the quirk that a given species has. There's a list of possible quirks, and each of the 6 species is given a random quirk from that list. It may be that some species have the same quirk. But anyway, so we get this numeric value, and then we've got this. It's $QD square bracket $Q square bracket $Z, end square bracket, end square bracket. So what it's saying is you've got Z, which is the number of the species, find the quirk that species Z has, and then find the entry in $QD, which is that particular quirk. QD, as you might have guessed, stands for quirk description. So this is what you'll end up getting. You might end up getting, let's say Z is 4, and let's say species 4 has quirk 6. Well, that means that Q4 will be equal to 6, and then it'll print QD6, which is that they loathe formality, and a formal approach will never result in them allowing you to enter their settlement. So what we'd get, in short, from this piece of text is something like: the writing speaks of a race which lives in the underworld. They have the appearance of children with children from the waist up, goats from the waist down, something like that. They are invincible in battle, and then you being the player can write that down, and that will be useful for you if you ever encounter that particular species. So that's one of the options. As I said, there's 50%. If you make the roll, there's a 50% chance the clue is a description of a particular set of people. Otherwise, it is a spell. I won't go through this in as much detail because that's not what I wanted to be the focus of this video, but broadly what it does is it chooses a random spell, and it has to be an actual spell. It can't be Cat's Eyes or Dwarf's Cloak, because in the fiction of the game they're not spells you learn, they're more like magic items. It tells you that the writing is instructions to cast that particular spell. If you already know how to cast that particular spell, because MD CXCY, MS CXCY is the basic type of encounter. MD CXCY is more detail about it. So in this particular case, it'll set random spell will set MD to be the number of a particular spell. Now, why are we setting MD when we didn't do it with the quirks? Well, the reason is because with the quirks, it just tells you the quirk, and then the encounter's over, and it sets MS to 0 anyways. Whereas with this, because there's a cost to learning a spell, you might leave and come back. So we need to record the state of the encounter, perhaps for later. Because you might choose not to lose the willpower at that time, and then you might perhaps go out of the dungeon and recover your will, and when you've got a bit more will, you come back and then you choose to learn the spell, for example. So the writing seems to be instructions on how to cast whichever it is, Unlocking the Heart or whatever it might be. If SL is spells learnt, so if the slot in array SL, which corresponds to MDCXCY, which spell this one's teaching you, if that equals 1, which means if you already know the spell, then it says, well, you already know the spell, so this writing isn't of any interest to you, and in that case, it sets MSCXCY to 0, and you won't see the writing again. And I've made a little note to myself that if you can ever lose spells, I'll need to change this code, because, well, for obvious reasons, you might want to come back to writing that tells you about a spell you already know, in the circumstance where in the future you forget that spell. But I haven't put anything in there that forgets a spell once it's learnt. So at the moment we can just sort of erase it. But let's say that you don't know the spell. Well, then it gives you the choice to either keep reading or ignore the writing for now. Ignore the writing for now sends you to explore. I'll get onto that branch in a second, but let's say you keep reading, which takes you to Clue Eyes. Well, that will cause you to lose between 1 and 6 willpower, and then if you're still alive, which is what if $DD means, then you you learn the spell, which means that the relevant slot in the SL array is set to 1, and also the slot 0 in the SL array is increased by 1 because SL0 is how many spells you know. It sets MS, the basic encounter type, to 0 because you've got no more use for the writing. Again, that would need to change if you ever can forget a spell. And you get to continue. So that's fairly straightforward, if indeed you're still alive. But let's say that you learn that the thing is instructions for casting a spell. You don't know the spell, but your willpower is quite low, and you decide to keep exploring for now, and maybe come back when your willpower is a bit better, perhaps when you've left the dungeon and come back. Well, then it will, as we've seen, it will set MD to 4, and you might find yourself, if you find yourself coming back to that location, you'll find yourself here, where it says you have returned to the writing, which seems to give instructions on how to cast whatever spell it has to cast. And again, it's got the choice of, since you know this, because you might have learnt the spell in the meantime, there are other ways to learn spells. Perhaps you scared away some people in a settlement, scared away the monsters in a settlement, and end up with a scroll that lets you cast a spell. But all it'll do is it'll just say, okay, so you've returned to this writing, and then it'll give you that choice again to either keep reading or ignore it for now. And I've said that when you move quickly, you won't see you won't get to see that. You won't get to see the writing. You will get to see the writing if you come back to it, because the sort of, in the fiction of the game, well, you know it's there, so presumably you sort of look around for it. But if you're moving quickly, you don't notice writing when you're moving into new areas. And the way that I've done that is fairly straightforward. In this page Explore 3, where it has this branching based on what sort of type of encounter it is, it says if MS CXCY is 0 or MS CXCY is 3 and OL equals 3. Well, OL is your speed. It actually stands for oil loss. If you move quickly, you'll lose 3 units of oil. It'll take you 15 minutes, in other words. And if you move cautiously, you'll lose 6, which means you lose half an hour. So if MS CXCY equals 3, i.e. it's writing on the wall, and your speed is 3, and OL is 3, meaning if you're moving quickly, then you just go straight to explore. You don't get any of the special, you don't get the special encounter. It doesn't send you to Clue or to old, it doesn't send you to Clue, sorry. It just treats it as if it's an empty junction, which means you can move quickly through a junction, and then if you move slowly when you're coming back, you can still notice, oh, there's some writing there. I didn't see it when I was speeding through. So that's how clues work. That is one more way that you can find out the quirks of the monsters in the dungeon. There is one more way, and I'm going to demonstrate that in a future video, but I hope that what I showed you today was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.